footage reveals Al-Quds Brigades ambush hit dozens of Israeli soldiers. This was the biggest ambush that happened today inside of Gaza. The armed wing of the PIJ carried out a very complex operation that included minefields being detonated, direct RPG shells on terror forces belonging to Israel, and 107 missiles being launched from one building to another building where Israeli terror forces are positioned inside of Gaza. Israel admitted that 3 were killed. The IDF confirmed that. The Israeli Minister of Genocide also confirmed that these people were killed. Some reports said 2, some reports said 3. All that we know is there were very, very large ambushes inside of the Gaza Strip with huge blows coming again towards the Israeli terror forces. Now, this was the biggest one by the PIJ's armed wing. But we did not just have this attack. We're talking about attacks coming from the armed wing of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, from the Salaheddeen Brigades, they're called, from the Popular Resistance Committees, the armed wing of the PIJ, Al-Quds Brigades, and of course, Alqassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, who have been publishing unbelievable footage coming from Gaza of their fighters literally holding an explosive device and planting it inside of Israeli APCs, burning everyone in them. And that's in Khan Yunis primarily, because lots of the battles are happening in Khan Yunis, by the way. It's one of the fiercest resistance hubs, but not only. It's coming all across. There are multiple actions wherever genocide forces are positioned. Now, mind you, Israel, despite the fact that they claim that they occupy or control 75% of the territories inside of Gaza. Today, for example, they said, oh no, it's actually 65. Yeah, 10%, whatever, who cares about 10%? It doesn't really matter. But they're actually positioned, the majority of them, in areas that are outside the populated areas already, in what Israel wants to ideally make a security buffer zone in the future. Now, of course, this is very unlikely to happen, especially with any agreement coming from the Palestinian resistance. However, this is what Israel is trying. These attacks now are coming with a confirmation coming from the first time that has been published by the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. The Israeli Broadcasting Authority, based on an official from the IDF, a senior official, senior army officer, said the following: Hamas fighters in the northern and southern sectors know the army forces gathering points and attack them with unprecedented determination in recent months. Who's that? An Israeli army officer speaking to the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. Hamas fighters in the northern and southern sectors know the army forces gathering points and attack them with unprecedented determination in recent months. Shall we say thank you for confirming? We have been saying that, but they're confirming now. The Broadcasting Authority also added, based on this official, Hamas fighters have resumed launching bold and daring attacks on army forces with machine guns, explosive devices, and rocket projectiles. Again, shall we thank them for confirming what we've been saying? They're confirming now. Bold, daring, unprecedented determination. Come on, say it as it is. Continue. That's the Israeli army for you. Confirming, of course, what we already know, and we've been saying for a very long time. However, now it's that's it. It's public knowledge in Israel. The Palestinian resistance is brave. Unprecedented determination, bold actions, bravery that hasn't been seen before according to them. And to be fair, I mean, the images that were coming and the footage from Gaza showed unbelievable stuff. So you have a confirmation there from the IDF directly, simultaneously with them admitting that the morale of the terrorist child murderers being at an all-time low. Internal crisis, internal problems, all sorts of issues with the military, with the leadership of the army, with the leadership of the political side of things. And now it's not just, talks. There are outright, again, confrontations between the Israeli IDF chief of staff and Benjamin Netanyahu. Yet again, more clashes coming between them, with an involvement coming from the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, too. And we had a couple of reports in Israel speaking about this incident that happened. One of them was Channel 13, and another one was another Israeli media outlet. Let me tell you about them and exactly what happened. This was one of the reports. The debate between the prime minister and the chief of staff. They're calling it a debate here. It was much more than a debate. It was literally an argument. People were shouting. In this report, they said the prime minister convened a security discussion that dealt with the possible next steps in the Gaza Strip if the ceasefire does not come into effect. I was furious with the chief of staff, Zamir, who claimed the IDF cannot control 2 million people. Another confrontation developed between Smotrich and the Director General of the Ministry of Defense. Stop stinging me. They had a lot of confrontations, these two, and there were many arguments between them in relation to the war and in relation to the fact that the Israeli army isn't actually implementing the plan as it was ordered to by the political leadership. And in one of the statements where they had an exchange, Smotrich and the IDF chief of staff, the IDF chief of staff told Smotrich, why don't you say it that you don't care about the prisoners of war? To which Smotrich responded to the IDF chief of staff. These are the people leading Israel now. He told the IDF chief of staff, why don't you say it as it is? You can't do the job. You can't do the job that you were ordered to. Tell the IDF isn't doing the job. And that's being reported in Israel now. Chaos, actual chaos. Now, this meeting came from Benjamin Netanyahu in case the war or the ceasefire doesn't work, which we will get to in a second. But during that heated debate, they were speaking about everything that's been happening so far. Netanyahu is asking the army, give us a plan in case the ceasefire doesn't work. We ordered you to occupy 75%, and now you're telling me 65%, although previously you said we already occupied 75%. And with that, they're suffering losses. In the same cabinet meeting, the IDF chief of staff told Bezalel Smotrich, you know that soldiers are dying, and you know that we're having people being killed because of this expansion of the genocide. Of course, Smotrich, from his part, he doesn't really care. Smotrich at one point said that you're basically wasting time. Zamir responded, he said, don't tell us that we're wasting time. We're doing the job as we are ordered. We are not faltering, according to him. There is no faltering in Gaza. We're doing exactly what you imposed on us. And I suggest you be careful with what you say. And there is no need to mention that our soldiers are dying in battle. Bitter, differences and hostilities between the leadership of the State of Israel, and that's something that's been happening ever since the beginning of the genocide. Then there was the debate of the IDF controlling Gaza militarily. That's something that the IDF doesn't want. They don't want to militarily control Gaza. Of course, there's an argument that they can't, but, and he mentioned, the IDF chief staff said, we can't control a hostile environment that's starving and wants to kill us. How can we control them? Then, according to another report about the same meeting, Netanyahu raised his voice at the IDF chief staff at one point. He said, I don't want a military government, but I want to move them to a large civilian space. I'm not willing for Hamas to remain in the Strip in any way. I will not compromise on that. The alternative to an evacuation plan, the South, is to run over the Strip and occupy Gaza, but that means killing the hostages, and I don't want that, and I can't do that. Now, Netanyahu is saying that, by the way, to try and look appealing to Bezalel Smotrich, and hinting that it's going to kill people if we're going to have full-blown military occupation and implement martial law inside of the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, to show that I need a plan from the Israeli army in case the ceasefire talks don't work. We need a plan B, because so far all of the plans failed. The plan to eliminate Hamas failed. The general's plan in North Gaza, do you remember? That failed. Gideon's chariots or Netanyahu's wheelchair, that also failed too. Nothing is working. And if they're going to come up with another campaign tomorrow, that's going to fail as well, because they're only getting weaker and weaker. And the Palestinian resistance is getting braver and braver against the genocide forces. And they're confirming that. Again, bold and unprecedented, and all of that coming from Israel. So that's in relation to Netanyahu, the resistance actions in Gaza, and the talks of a potential ceasefire, or the potential that it doesn't work. The plans, basically, that Netanyahu wants to have. Which leads us to the actual ceasefire and the response that came from Hamas. What does that mean exactly? Are we headed towards a ceasefire? What's going to happen with all of that? So Hamas officially had a response. There were initially reports coming in Reuters and in Al-Arabi, but now we have an official response being published by Hamas, accepting the proposal with slight, clarifications. Nothing that would be a deal breaker, according to all of the observers and people involved. As a matter of fact, they're viewing it positively in Israel too. But also a response that, if it goes ahead, by the way, carries out a lot of risk. It carries a lot of risk with it, and it could potentially have holes. So what did they say, and what's likely to happen after that? Well, let's talk about the response itself first. This was the response that came from Hamas. They delivered a positive response. Is Gaza close to a ceasefire agreement? This was in Al-Arabi, who first reported that Hamas accepted the ceasefire. On Friday, the Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, submitted the official response to the ceasefire proposal in the Gaza Strip, stressing that the response was positive. The movement said in a statement that it completed its internal consultations with Palestinian factions and forces regarding the mediator's latest proposal to halt the aggression against our people in Gaza, stressing that it had submitted its response to the mediators, which was positive according to the statement. The movement added that it is very seriously prepared to immediately enter into a round of negotiations regarding the mechanism for implementing this framework of the proposed ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which has been witnessing ongoing Israeli aggression since October the 7th. Sources had previously revealed to Al-Arabiya TV that Hamas had provided a positive response to the ceasefire proposal in Gaza, adding that the movement had expressed its approval of the substance of the proposal while requesting minor formal amendments. Minor formal amendments doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be very severe. And I'm going to get to the analysis of all of that in a sec. Sources told Al Arabiya that the response submitted by Hamas included affirmations of the need to adhere to the humanitarian protocol, in addition to reservations regarding the existence of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and a demand for a role for United Nations organizations. There are growing indications of a deal in Gaza, with sources previously confirming to Al Arabiya TV that mediators had submitted a draft agreement to Hamas regarding the Gaza Strip. It included a 60-day truce, an exchange of prisoners and detainees, the arrival of appropriate amounts of aid and distribution through agreed-upon channels, discussion of arrangements of the so-called day after the war, and serious negotiations on the final agreement. Hamas wants guarantees, according to this article here, and that's something that they reiterated multiple times. Mukhaymar Abu Saada, a professor of the political science at Al-Azhar University, says Hamas consulted with other Palestinian factions and obtained prior approval for the previous offer by Steve Witkoff, given the catastrophic situation in Gaza. The Palestinian factions have given their approval. They would, and Hamas would never go with anything that the factions do not agree upon, the Palestinian resistance movement. With Hamas discussing the issue with the military leadership in Gaza, which was responsible for the Israeli detainees. Therefore, the approval of the movement's military wing is essential to overcoming the existing problems. And of course, they've had a bit more input in relation to the ceasefire. Let me give you my input here. So, number one, we're seeing a shift, not just from the Palestinian side, by the way. The bigger shift is coming from the Israeli side. Why is the bigger shift coming from the Israeli side? Because 2 to 3 weeks ago, just before the war against Iran started, the Israeli aggression against Iran, Benjamin Netanyahu was still talking about the old school statements in relation to Gaza, like eliminating Hamas. We're not going to stop until we achieve all of the goals and all of that nonsense. All of a sudden, after the war with Iran ended, Netanyahu started to speak about defeating Hamas rather than eliminating. He stopped saying disarming Hamas and started speaking about no further arming of Hamas. They're trying up until the last second to push for the delusion of expelling certain elements from Hamas from outside of the Gaza Strip. Talks are now reaching a level of even, if they go out temporarily and, the weapons, they shouldn't be used, they should be kept in storage under the ground and what have you, all of that talk. But what we understand here is that there are concessions from Israel. What does that show you? That shows you that despite all of the destruction and genocide, you have the Palestinian resistance standing firm and being in the powerful position in relation to the demands of the ceasefire. But we're still talking about something temporary that would include a period where things will be negotiated to reach a deal. And that's why we still have these delays. It's not yet confirmed if the Americans gave such guarantees, because there are other reports about the side agreement that Israel has with the United States that would allow Israel to conduct actions inside of the Gaza Strip if they pose a threat to its security, similar to what it's doing with Lebanon, which means the intensity of the war, the intensity of the genocide will be reduced dramatically, the majority of it, but Israel might attack here and there. It's difficult for it to reach the same levels as it is in Lebanon, judging by previous experiences of ceasefire in Gaza, because in previous ceasefires in Gaza, the Palestinian resistance was visibly out there. These scenes clearly disturbed the Zionists a lot. They don't want them to do that. They want to appear as if, we completely eliminated them and they're no longer there. It hurts Israel's image very much. As a matter of fact, the release of the Israeli prisoners of war and them thanking the resistance and kissing the heads of the Palestinian resistance fighters who were protecting them, these were also scenes that Israel doesn't really like. So they're going to try a lot here. But this will not be solid to a level where it's a confirmation of the ending the war. However, it would be an opening to that. And there are various reasons why. Number one, the more time goes by, the closer we are to an ending of the war. A problem, there's always going to be a problem so long as there's something called Israel. There's always going to be a problem. But in relation to the actual war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, that's going to have to come to an end. No war will last forever. That's not going to happen. Another thing here. This ceasefire, they're talking about 60 days that could potentially be pushed up to 90. If this ceasefire begins, this will lead us to September, October, depending on where it starts. Sensitive period. But also close to a holiday period. In Israel, it wouldn't be necessarily convenient for Israel to start another attack in that time period, especially because the Palestinian resistance is not going to be releasing all of the alive Israeli prisoners of war unless they agree to an all-out and complete ending, and the Palestinian resistance is fully assured. So long as you see that the Palestinian resistance is still holding some of the IDF prisoners of war, because now it's almost only IDF captives in Gaza. So let no one start even using the word hostage, right? They were from the Gaza division. The people remaining are the soldiers, officers, and commanders of the Gaza division that the Palestinian resistance took as prisoners of war on the 7th of October after they took down the whole division in less than 2 hours. These are the ones remaining. They will not be releasing them, which means that if they don't release them, that means it hasn't been completely concluded. But the signs that there could be this extension are you're headed towards a holiday period. If there would be extension, it would be for 30 to 60 more days. By then, you're almost in 2026. What happens in 2026? Expected elections in Israel. So Netanyahu, who was worried about having the elections too early, although he already has plans to have early elections now with the propaganda in relation to Iran, and we destroyed and we did this and we did that. The threats of resigning from the government coming from people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir would no longer be that relevant. Why? Because from Netanyahu's perspective, he's going to be facing an election anyway. And what is, changing the election from the end of 2026 to early 2026 with no significant changes whatsoever, because he's done, the things that he can do. He attacked Gaza, he attacked the West Bank, he attacked Lebanon, he attacked Syria, he attacked Yemen, he attacked Iran. So there are no more military accomplishments for Netanyahu to brag about, especially after seeing how limited he is, especially in relation to Iran. But he can say that I achieved and I accomplished all of that. Therefore, I am in a position where I'm not going to be threatened to have a member or two or a party resigning, because he can get a safety net for an extended period and potentially have early elections somewhere in early to mid 2026 instead of late 2026. What are the other important notes? That it's Israel and the United States who are changing positions now. Well, firstly, we have talks about the United Nations organizations in Israeli media and the Red Crescent taking the aid. That's something that the Israelis weren't speaking about. And that beef that happened between Smotrich and the IDF chief of staff, in it, they were also talking about the fact that some of the aid is going to Hamas, according to them, of course. So the whole reason that Israel removed the UNRWA organization and other independent charities is to create a disastrous humanitarian situation in Gaza. We have a situation where they're trying to apply pressure on the Palestinian side with the aid. Imagine, with the aid for babies, for innocent women and men and elderly. Can you imagine the levels of depravity? I mean, we haven't seen something like that in history. But now in Israeli media, they're talking about activating UN organizations and the Red Crescent in Gaza. If they activate these two organizations, because there were also reports, by the way, some of these charities were already being active, but Israel is keeping it on the low, and not just the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But if they activate them, that means Israel is taking a huge step back. And the United States too, because the United States was supporting Israel with this whole narrative against the UNRWA, a humanitarian and relief organization that was founded to address the catastrophe of the Nakba of 1948, of the mass displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people. That's why the organization was established. Yet another evidence of ethnic cleansing in 1948 and 1967. So they want to stop that altogether because they want to use the humanitarian aid as a military pressure tool. Again, going against international law and rules, every rule under the sun. These are indications that the Americans are more keen, and the Israelis are also leaning towards ending the war, or at least having a very serious de-escalation in Gaza. Now, there are a couple of details left. The details that are left are, we don't know exactly what are the comments of Hamas that they want to be addressed. The other thing is whether that will be accepted or not. There is a very high likelihood that they will pass, especially if they're not related to very substantial things inside of the agreement. Why? Because the whole purpose behind this and the drive is so that Donald Trump can get a personal credit. Donald Trump is narcissistic, self-obsessed, and he wants to get the credit for ending the war. That's why he wants to have that declaration happening with Benjamin Netanyahu inside of the United States. And Donald Trump wouldn't have invited Benjamin Netanyahu to the United States unless he was confirming, getting a solid confirmation from Benjamin Netanyahu that he will be confirming a ceasefire. And if Netanyahu goes against that, he's going to face huge problems. And again, although we know the relationship between the United States and Israel and all of that, but there are going to be problems because Trump previously, he was not communicating with Netanyahu. He was totally cutting him off for a while. He didn't visit Israel. He ordered his senior officials to cancel the planned visits to Israel. Then the Iran war happened, ended how it did. And clearly after that war ended, they were looking at getting a deal. That's why immediately after the war with Iran, Benjamin Netanyahu all of a sudden started to say that we've had a window of opportunities that we never had before. and he started to exaggerate with all of the opportunities that, Israel is having, as a way for him to climb down the ladder and get to a ceasefire. Again, these details are remaining. At the end of the day, there could be refusal. Everything could be torn apart, but there's more likelihood that they will be solved purely because of Donald Trump. The meeting is due to take place early next week. Therefore, the mediators would have to work to get these things addressed fairly quickly. The groups and the mediators, the people talking, are already there. So when we're talking about this response that's coming from Hamas, it was already probably handed to the mediators and the other side with a response already there, by the way, from the other party. But now we've had that, being published in the media, and they're not talking about these small details so that they don't hurt the prospect of reaching a ceasefire. So there's going to be two really, really intense days now in relation to the talks. The Palestinian side, of course, they're showing willingness, that they're very serious about the ceasefire. The talks in Israel are very positive. Israel has made some concessions, especially with the tone of Benjamin Netanyahu himself. But the confirmation of such ceasefire will only come once it is declared. And that declaration, if it happens, it will most likely happen with the President of the United States when Benjamin Netanyahu visits the United States next week. And then after that, there will be more revelations about the input, about the details of the ceasefire, how long it's going to take, up until when it's going to take place. And then, of course, everything will be more clear.